All right, everybody. Welcome to another Turf Club Zoom meeting. Today we have Scott Bordner, Superintendent of Union League National in New Jersey, and he's here to talk about your portfolio for success. Scott's graduated from Horry Georgetown Technical College, was a former superintendent at Chicago Golf Club, and Scott, I know you got a little bit of a Marion background as well. So thank you for being here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to the club and everybody who's joined.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a little bit different way to give this seminar, but we'll try to flow through it and see if you have any questions in the meantime. Ask them right away, get some conversation flowing, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, that's perfect intro for me, just to give everybody a heads up. So for anybody that's in here as a participant, you obviously don't have the ability to chime in with audio and video right now, but you do have a question and answer section if you hover over the presentation. Anytime you have a question, just put it in there at any time. I'll stop Scott, interrupt him, try and get some question and answer going midstream. If not, we'll wait till the end, but hopefully you get all your questions answered. All right, Scott, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and it's all yours.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. The reason I titled it Your Portfolio for Success is everybody's definition of success is a little bit different. So that's where we're going to start, is trying to go through what you see as definition of success. To some people, it's hosting a major tournament. To some people, it's being at a top 100 club. To some people, it's being at a private club. To some people, it's more family oriented. To some people, it's being able to have work-life balance. It's about money. It's about location. So for each individual, no matter what level you want to be at, if you want to be a irrigation tech for the rest of your life, a assistant superintendent, a superintendent, a director, it's whatever that definition is to you. So the earlier you can figure this out, the easier it is to align yourself up to that level that you want to be on. So the first thing is location. If you want to work down south and you know you want to be on Bermuda grass or vice versa, then try to stay in that location. Try to get to an area where, try to get to a golf course where people place a lot of superintendents. So as you're looking through the process, it's good to ask a superintendent, you know, what your track record is for placing people. The next big thing is the level that you want to be at based on lifestyle and budget. Matt Schaefer sat me down in one of my first reviews and he went over this with me, and it always stuck in my head that there was different stairs to climb down. Top level, spending a lot of money, is the top stair, and working your way down different budget levels. It was really hard for me when I left a course like Marion to go be a superintendent. I'd go into clubs that had a smaller budget, and one of the biggest things they always said was, well, you're spending this much money. How are you going to be able to do that at our golf course with significantly less dollars? It was actually easier for me to get good interviews and have good conversation with courses that were one step below Marion, 2 steps below. But once I got below that 2 steps, it was much harder for people to see apples to apples with that.
Hey, I got a question already, Scott.
Yep.
So you said it was hard to, you know, maybe 2 steps below or below that, could you not even get an interview with those groups, or you could get an interview, but then you didn't get a look after that?
Some I would get interviews, but as soon as you went to do the walk around or you got into the interview, you could tell they were really harping on that specific thing. It was just harder for you to get a fair crack at that job.
I got it. My thought process behind this, and sorry to hijack your thing 2 slides in, Was it, if you weren't getting the interview, I'm thinking of people that are in line with 50 and 55 years old and they get let off, laid off. And now they're trying to get a job and maybe they were at a high-end club, but they're just happy to, be getting a job and doing what they love and they don't want the pressure anymore, but they might be able to say that in like a cover letter as to why they're applying for the job as opposed to just, touting the big resume and everything they have and the money they spend. I don't know. I was just thinking out loud about it. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You got to be able to get that message across quickly. No, you're good. The next thing I'm going to jump into is branding. And I stole some of this from Bill Brown. I sat through one of his seminars that he was giving assistants out in Chicago, and it really clicked with me. And it's even more so now in this day and age. What do you think of when you think of Target as a company, Subway, Walmart? What do you think of when you think of yourself? Can you self-reflect and say, what do others think of me? How have I branded myself? So if you've worked at, even more so at a larger scale club where they have a lot of interns, assistants, everyone is always judging each other. I mean, you look back at the people that you worked with and you thought that guy will never make it, or that guy is okay, or that should say person is not up to par with what I would think. That's sort of what you think of that person for a long period of time. So when you're acting the way you're acting and setting up a brand for yourself, it's not just to your peers, it's also to the members and the golf professional staff. And I'll get into that a little bit more, the value behind that, but I just wanted to touch base on how you set yourself up. What are people thinking, especially with social media? It's very easy to get a good brand or a bad brand and jump back and forth. So then we're going to jump into networking. This is something that I was fortunate enough to work for good people that were networked, not just in our area, but throughout the country. And the biggest thing that I hear when people say, I sent my resume in and I'm not getting any looks. Jobs aren't just going to come to you. You have to put forth an effort to go get that job. I can't tell you how much legwork I would do for my assistants when they were going for superintendent jobs, just trying to get them in the door. I mean, in an 8-year stretch, we had 8 guys that came up through the ranks, not necessarily straight from Chicago, but 8 guys who jumped into superintendent positions in an 8-year period. They each probably spent 40 hours per job doing research on those clubs that they got selected at. So then we're going to jump back into members and how you've branded yourself to the members. Having a member call another member at another club carries a lot more weight than any superintendent calling, any golf pro calling. They're hearing it from their friends. So it's no different than you hearing something from someone who you are close with versus someone randomly calling you up and referring you for a job. Another big thing is, how have you networked in that area? So an example for me, when Chicago Golf Club opened, I heard John Jennings was leaving. I called up a guy named Chris Scavere. He was an assistant superintendent at Chicago Golf Club. He interned for us at Marion. I called him up. Scott Pavelko was a superintendent who I volunteered with at Riviera in 2005, who is now at Bobolink, but at the time was at Cog Hill. Curtis James, superintendent at Old Elm. He was at Marion right before I was, and I had a relationship with him. Frank Erie, friends with Matt Schaefer, so I knew him. He was up at Westmoreland outside of Chicago. And then the USGA, because we had worked with them during the US Amateur and Walker Cup, I had a relationship with them. The reason for me putting that in there is I call up Chris Scavere. He tells me the members that I'm interviewing with, he knew them all personally. He knew what they liked and what they didn't like. Scott Pavelko told me what it was like going from Muirfield to Chicago, growing grass temperature-wise, things like that. Curtis James had members that were members at Chicago Golf Club. Frank Erie, same thing as Scott Pavelko, told me sort of the lay of the land in Chicago, what it was like. And the USGA had connections because both golf clubs had hosted tournaments through them. So going into that interview, I felt like I was taking an open book test instead of a closed book test. A lot of that is just how I branded myself, that people were willing to make phone calls for me, and the way I had networked at different tournaments, different events, things like that. Then we're going to jump into cover letter and resume. When you're, the way I like to set up cover letters and resumes is know as much information about the club as you can. And again, that reverts back to networking and knowing people that have insight into each club. So I'm not going to sit there and talk about massive renovations that we did at Marion to get ready for big tournaments when I know Chicago Golf Club doesn't want to do a lot of renovations, and they do a lot of little house in work, little work in-house, trying to keep things the same as they always were. I didn't want to sit there and talk about massive construction projects. Then it goes into, did you set yourself up for that job? A lot of times members don't really know what they're looking for on a resume. Not a lot of them have been worked on golf courses, yet alone in the superintendent realm. So the big thing to them is things that they hear on TV. So it's type of grass. They all know Poa, Poana, Poannual, location, history. Things to them, Marion carried a lot of weight for me. Then Chicago Golf Club carried a lot of weight on my resume as well. So those things, 90% of the members at Chicago Golf Club did not know that I ever worked at Rivercrest Golf Club for 2 years. And that's where I came directly from. They all knew I worked at Marion. Nothing against Rivercrest, it's just they have no idea what Rivercrest Golf Club is. When you get your resume out there, you are judged way before anybody meets you. When you have a lot of guest play coming out to your golf course on a daily basis, the way they remember the conditions that day or the golf course that day, that's what your resume really means. So if you're out there during a member guest or on a regular day when you have a lot of guest play, you know, those days are huge when you look down the line and start to understand the importance of having firm, fast conditions or wet conditions or green conditions, or it could be springtime and things aren't quite dialed in, or it could be the fall and leaves are everywhere. Whatever day they play it is what they judge you by. The last big thing with cover letter and resume is let people outside of our industry help proofread it. and this just goes back to the fact that most people who are interviewing you for a job don't really have an idea of what you actually do. So having people who aren't in the superintendent world look at your stuff is a lot more important than you sending it off to a bunch of other assistants or superintendents to look at it. Going to jump into things to start getting ready. Things I wish I would have done when I was just graduating from college. Get letters of recommendation right away. Don't wait, and keep in good contact with the people who you want to get letters of recommendation for. There are a lot of people who stay in contact once a year, once every couple years, and it's a lot easier for me to get excited and make a phone call for that person than somebody who you haven't heard from for 5 years that's going to jump out of the blue and say, hey, I need help. Another big thing is keep all your notes from tournaments, whether it's from the USGA, the PGA Tour, anything that you have like that. It looks good in a portfolio. If you get a nice letter from a member or from a guest that played the golf course, I have an entire file on my email, and at some point every year, somebody will tell you the golf course is the best it's ever played. You tend to hear that at least once a year, and those are nice little notes to just slide into a portfolio. Pictures are the next thing. Everybody has a camera on them all the time. There's not really an excuse to not have pictures of projects you've done. And instead of waiting until you actually have to put a resume together, have a file set aside, one that's bunkers, one that's tees, one that's drainage, one that's greens, anything that you can just use to plug and play. It's extremely beneficial. Once you do go for a job, you know exactly, if you've done your homework and have your network, you know exactly what they're sort of looking for their superintendent position or assistant position, either or. And a little trick I learned, before pictures and after pictures are really good to have. When you're taking the after picture, make sure it's on a sunny day. Everything looks a lot nicer in those pictures. All right, we're going to jump into the last slide here is preparation. So one of the things that I guess I didn't realize when I started going on interviews is 90% of the questions are geared away from turf or what we're actually doing as far as agronomics. So I had an assistant in Chicago that could not get a job and went on interview after interview, and I was trying to help him. And I had him start writing down questions and memorizing the answers to those questions. And it really helped out a lot. And I had a lot of guys follow him that then had those questions saved on the computer. And a lot of those things were based on leadership or what's the hardest thing you've ever done. Tell us a little bit about yourself. A lot were very repetitious, and probably in the business world, that's what they are. But if people already had a comfort level with 20 of the questions that they thought they were going to get asked and how they were going to answer them, they felt a lot more comfortable walking into an interview room and knowing that they might get 5 questions that throw them off. But if they have 20 memorized, 10 out of those 20 would get asked on a regular basis. Leadership, What are your styles, philosophies, examples of leadership? Those are the types of things in the business world that they're really focused on. It's things that they're comfortable talking about. Another big thing that helped me along the way was, instead of trying to do a PowerPoint presentation, instead of trying to stand up there and talk, I felt a lot better when it was conversation, and I felt like they were getting excited about their own golf course and talking about their own golf course. And a lot of my preparation from the past had helped me in that conversation. It was easier for me to talk about things and show pictures quickly and get them excited. Then I could take pictures of their golf course and show them what it could look like if we did a similar project to what we had done before. Because one-sided discussions for me were just not very successful. I'm not as good at sales and that end of things. So it was easier for me it was more effective for me in the job search to have conversation and flow of conversation be dictated a lot by their questions and me asking them questions. One of the first interviews I went on, actually it was my first one, Rhode Island Country Club. Walked in and Brad Faxon was sitting there. And as soon as they told me the budget, I told them the expectations were here and the budget was here. And the conversation got really awkward after that. And I did not get invited back for number one, or didn't get invited back after the first interview. When I got back to Marion, Matt sat me down and he's like, "You told them that they didn't have enough money in the budget?" He had a couple choice words in there. And then we went into discussing just prove yourself before you tell them exactly what you need, and give them a golf course that they'd be proud of, and you don't have to worry about budget. The last thing I have in here is, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And that's something a friend of mine told me recently, in sort of talking about life and where careers have gone. And it's something that just kind of holds true to what I see in this industry. The people who put in the time to work, learn, make the connections, really have passion for the industry, end up falling into pretty good spots. And I have one little last thing, if I can figure out how to switch. No.
Still there, John? Maybe if you escape, because you want to show your some of your advertising stuff.
So I was trying to get back to my main screen here.
Yeah, just go to, just hit escape on your keyboard. That should take you out of the PowerPoint.
Then I can go anywhere and you can still see it?
Yeah, I mean, we see the back end of it, but that's fine.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, we see your folder with you're going to open.
So one of my good friends beat me out for a job. And it was a job that I thought I should have had a better chance at. And I didn't even get to the second round. And I was like, all right, so what did you do? And he said, I gave him a 100-day plan and I thought it was really successful. I said, how did you give them a 100-day plan from just looking at the golf course? He's like, a lot of it's fluff, but listen, they don't understand what we do for a living. And it really makes them feel comfortable if you just put it out there with some basic words. So this is one from Al Benson Crone, who is the new superintendent at Blue Mound. He called me and asked me for interview help, and I told him sort of what I did for the interview process, and he put together this 100-day plan, and it was better than any of them I've ever put together. So I asked him if I could show you this one. So it just goes down through his maintenance plan, what he had in line for, I mean, it goes into greens. It's things that we're used to doing, but it's nothing that was over the top that any of us couldn't put together. He just went that extra mile and did a heck of a job at putting this thing out there to the membership. And the feedback he got afterwards was, you know, he had more passion than anybody else going for the job, yada, yada, yada. And he said it just made conversation flow very well. So if you look at fairways, simple things, tees, bunkers, bunker banks, edges, intermediate rough, natives. And I'm trying to get down to the staff communication. He got into the actual architecture of the club that was really impressive. Opening address to the current department. I mean, showing people in the business world something like this, I don't think it took them a whole lot of conversation to figure out he was the guy. Here's where it goes into the long range goals, complete master plan. He went in and took pictures of what they were talking about, but put it on a scale to their club so they could see it. So things like this, I mean, he probably spent 100 hours doing this while he was working full time at Erin Hills. And the point to see something like this is somebody else is going to go to this level to get a job. You have to show that same aggressive style to match that intensity or that thoroughness because somebody else is putting that out there. Here's another one I have that has superintendent interview questions. So this is what I was talking about where one of my guys had gone for a bunch of jobs. You can look down through here. Most of this is not very technical information when you get down into it. Management philosophies, staff watering, plant disease, experience with bent POA. I mean, water management is one of the most broad things that you can ask somebody. How do you explain it? If that explanation determines the job, that's a really, really hard thing to work around. That's really kind of the gist of what I had, Dr. Kaminsky.
Good. Yeah, I think tons of useful information in here. I'm gonna. Do you have anything else to share on your screen? I was gonna stop the screen share.
No, that's fine.
Here, actually, I'll leave it there with that. With your, I can just leave it on there in case anybody has any ideas. So we can basically open it up for questions and maybe some dialogue. Kyle, I don't know if you had anything. Somebody, there are going to be questions coming in. So let me see. There are a couple questions. So let me read these. So one question is, I've had issues with using my current resume at times, 10 years military service and 5 years as a government contractor. The only thing that has been landing me any opportunities being a turf student at Penn State. We are, brother. Do I need to just totally take out all of that experience I have with my current background, or what, or question? And then another question he had is LinkedIn being used more and more in the industry. So I have some thoughts on it, but Scott, why don't you take that?
So going for a superintendent job or an assistant job?
You said assistant.
You said current student or former student?
I think Anthony's in the online program, the World Campus program at Penn State.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
And the military background is stopping him from getting looks?
I don't know if it's stopping him. I think that I guess my without seeing his resume, my thought is probably that he's, it's dominating his resume. And he probably doesn't have a lot of turf or golf course experience. He's taking classes online. And I see this a lot with my students in the 2-year program. They come with, a lot of other experience other than turf. And they want to highlight that because it's like so important to them because they did it. I think military is huge to mention and include. I tend to downplay all the outside experience though, other than turf related experience, even if it's minimal. Highlight the Penn State thing or any university you're at. I think it's important because that obviously shows them that that's what you want to do as a career. And then, at some point you're going to have to, I don't know, Anthony, what your background is on golf or sports turf or in the turf industry in terms of work. But at some point, you got to get in and get the experience. And that may mean with none, you start at the ground level and work your way up. And at some point that military and government contractor stuff has to just become like a one line on the bottom of the resume under work experience or something.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's such a shortage of assistants out there. I send me your resume if you're looking for a job.
I don't know where he lives, but maybe you can chime in the chat too. There's a bunch of questions, so I'm going to try and go through them. Let me see. I'll say done. All right, so next one, I've got going in order because there's so many that are coming in. Can you explain your transition and applying for jobs from the East Coast to Chicago, then back eventually to the East Coast? So that's a good question. Billy Covert, one of our 4-year students.
Billy, solid resume. I haven't responded to you on Twitter yet, or your little website. The fact that you went out and then put that out to the public, awesome job, first and foremost. To me, I was from Chicago, and I worked in Colorado, and I worked in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina when I was in school, New York. So I sort of set myself up to be able to go in the Midwest, or from the East Coast to the Midwest was pretty easy. But to do that's one of the things that I guess if you know the location you want to be at, great. If not, you better have some clubs that are recognizable. So Marion did that for me, and it made Chicago Golf Club realize where I was coming from. If I would have just had Rivercrest on my resume, I would have had a hard time getting anything to like getting out to that big of a club in Chicago.
Yeah, he said he's thinking in the notes section, he's thinking of possibly going out west to like the LA area and then back to the East Coast. So one thing I could say to you, Billy, is obviously the sooner you start being in the area that you want to and establishing yourself, that's probably good. But as a undergraduate student, 20, 21, 22 years old, like you have so much time to like go out and experience different things before you really have to like be like, I need to be in this area because that's where I ultimately want to get a full-time permanent job. And like Scott did, he's from Chicago, but he had Marion on his resume, which could probably help him get jobs throughout much of the country. So it depends on that level that you want to be at. So I have a question for you, Scott, and then we'll get to some of the other people in here. How were you received being a Marion superintendent and then going to Chicago? I heard all the rumors of like, oh, the East Coast people shouldn't be getting jobs in Chicago. And many people didn't realize you were actually from Chicago. So like, I was curious how things were received. And I think how many superintendents did you place? How many assistants did you place in superintendent's positions in the time you were there?
Well, that's where it kind of got funny because people were mad that East Coast people were getting jobs. And to me, I don't know. I didn't really care. I heard of whispers from people who couldn't stop talking, but then when my assistants got jobs, it became, well, what do you have to work at Chicago Golf Club to get a job? So I don't know. There's a lot of good superintendents out there and a lot of good superintendents everywhere. I mean, everybody gets so competitive for these jobs, but if you know the game of how it works and you choose not to play it, I don't know. Like, again, it's sending in a resume versus really digging in and finding members who know members. I was doing a lot of that legwork, and my assistants were interviewing well and made it easier.
And how many assistants did you place?
There was five that jumped directly from Chicago, including my assistant that just took over for me at Chicago Golf Club. There was 8 total that were AITs, interns that I helped get jobs out there.
It's pretty incredible. So I'm going to clear out a couple of these things. Anthony was just updating us on, he said he's a current student, World Campus 2-year. And that he's ultimately, I think, planning on going for his, I think that's his Bachelor of Science, like his BS degree. And then he was asking about the government stuff. He said, yeah, he thinks that maybe it's just too much on his resume. And so that was what he was asking about with the government work. So we have another question that says, would you save before and after pictures for an interview process, or would you include them with the initial application?
That's always, I gave this speech to my assistants the other day, and a similar question came up, and how aggressive to go at different times. You just have to gauge how much information you want to give them based on what your chances are to get a second interview. If you throw everything at them at once and then you get a second interview and don't have more information to give them, it makes you the clubhouse leader, and then you get beat out because somebody's got a ton of other information for the second interview. So I always try to be a little careful and just get my foot in the door and then hit the gas pedal. But if you think it's a long shot that you're even going to get an interview, throw everything at it.
That's actually a good point. I tend to say don't put all that stuff all at once, or, you know, like Billy did, like having a website, you can direct them to that if you want, and if they want to go get more information. But sometimes people get overloaded with huge packets, you know, and who's seeing it in the initial phases and stuff. But that's a good point, depending on how aggressive you want and whether you're really, that's a long shot or a good one. Billy had another question. Said, what is the one thing you would say to set yourself apart when applying for a superintendent's position? The one thing you would say. Or I don't know if yeah, I don't know. It could be either way. Like, I don't know if he's saying, like, what's one thing that you could say that you feel set yourself apart, or what's one thing you could say to the people to set yourself apart. I'm not sure which one he's going with that, but you can answer it any way you want.
Both. I'll say this was the most important thing for me that I felt very comfortable with when I was going for jobs. I would always make sure that people knew that I didn't always have to have the answer, that I knew the people that would have the answer for me. So in this industry, the one thing that's really made me successful is surrounding myself with really good people. Assistants, irrigation techs, consultants, you know, to me, that's what's been my key to success. And that's what has gotten me jobs, because saying that kind of stuff in the interview room goes a long way.
Good. We got another one here. Jason Tharp said, Scott, through your years at Chicago Golf Club, what were a few of your greatest challenges that you overcame, and how? And it doesn't matter. It could be business, agronomic, anything.
Greatest challenges at Chicago, where it was a small membership that didn't want to change. So you always had to make sure that your pencil was sharp on the budget end, because it was coming out of 160 people's pockets. But you also needed to make sure you were engaged enough, because we weren't constantly doing big projects. We were able to do small things. We did a lot of those in-house just to keep myself from becoming bored, complacent, things like that.
Okay. Another question. What would you say about construction project experience to achieve as an assistant before becoming a superintendent? So, you know, how important is that aspect of it?
Construction to me was a very eye-opening thing at Marion. We got to see how to do a lot of renovations, which really gave me the comfort to know what I could tackle in-house versus what I needed to have help with from a contractor. To me, it was very important to see drainage and to see how things were built, so I understood when there was an issue what could be going wrong. If I was coming straight out of college, I'd try to go work for a construction company for a year and travel around and just see different things.
Yeah, I'll comment on that too, because obviously the getting the construction experience is huge for people. But I listened to Armin Suni talk a little bit about what people put on their resumes and cover letters, and they always highlight that as like construction. Well, if you're not going to a club that wants to do a lot of construction, but you're boosting construction, he was like, the members see that and think you just want to come in there and blow their course up, and that's the last thing they want. So like, you really have to, you said it earlier, Scott, about knowing as much about the club as possible before applying and what it is that they want. I think there's no doubt having construction experience, project management, irrigation installations, those are huge skills to have and information. But you still, I don't know if that gets you a superintendent's job, unless you want to be known as a construction superintendent. How do you feel about that, Scott, in terms of like having a niche? I try to tell my students that, like, have a niche in the area. Like, are you the type of person that's going to always go and do a grow-in and you don't mind bouncing around from course to course? Are you going to be the renovation guy that brings a course back from the dead? Are you going to be the multi-course person? Are you going to be the resort person? Do you feel that it's beneficial to be really, really known or have a niche, or do you think you just got to be everything to everybody?
Well, that's where it sort of goes back to the first slide I said, which is, what is your definition of success? If you're a construction guy and that's what you like doing and that's what makes you happy, then you don't want to stay at a course once it's done for too long.
I tell my students, like, you want to be successful, don't, go to a place that can go nowhere but up, take it as high as you can get it and get the hell out and go to the next one. It's like, you can always be the savior, and you never wait around long enough for them to find something to be pissed off at you about.
It is really hard to follow, like following John Jennings at Chicago when he had just went to Shinnecock. That was very interesting. Like, very different than if there's a lot of dead grass everywhere and it's there's a lot of changes that are easy to make and you look really good versus, okay, John just didn't get to the native areas yet.
Right. But you did a great job there with the native areas. So there you go.
Yeah.
Another question is in here. Would you suggest go to a club for the long haul, working your way up as an assistant, or getting multiple 2 or 3 assistant positions before then going and applying for a superintendent's position?
I would like to have a little more diversity and then jump from the place where you think is a couple steps above where you want to be at. So to me, I learned a ton at Marion while I was there with, the group of guys that were there. There was 10 of us that are all superintendents that were working side by side. And to me, I learned a ton there, but if I wouldn't have had the background of working at the public golf course that I did, knowing how to just sometimes make things work, not throwing money at them, it would have really put me in a little tougher spot moving forward to be successful.
Yeah, I think the diversity of portfolio is big. I have students, you see it, right? I deal with resumes. I go over and teach it in a class, and they've got 8 years of experience on one golf course. And I'm like, it's so hard to make a resume stand out, even though that person has like a ton of stuff. Unless that one golf course is Augusta National or Marion, right? Where you can like at least say something about it that's like, people get all excited about. regardless of what that means. But I kind of like the idea. I don't think you should go, you should always have a plan in mind about where you're going to ultimately end up. But I think, going a couple years working for someone, learning what they're doing, maybe going somewhere else where they have a project going on or where you can learn something new, add to that resume, get another person, on your side, you basically are building a network of people rather than staying at the same place. I think that's good. At some point, you got to figure out, like, I can't just keep going from assistant to assistant to assistant, because that doesn't look good either. If you do that forever, you'll never get a superintendent's job. But I think that I agree, Scott, with you that diversity of portfolio is good. So how's everything going at Union League? Like all that construction you got going on there? I haven't seen much, but there's been a few posts and it looks pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's slowed down a little bit, just trying to keep with the social distancing stuff. But it's been a lot of fun. We've moved over 1 million cubic yards of soil or sand. So, I mean, he completely revamped the entire property. So it's just
That's
fun,
great.
totally different challenge.
With construction, was that deemed essential because you're dealing with plants and stuff, or was it like pretty much shut down? I mean, in State College, we've got 3 high-rises being constructed right now that are all frozen, and they have been for a month.
Yeah, the construction part's frozen, but there's still so much planting, like a lot of landscaping things can still continue. And if your irrigation system is started, that can continue. So there's little things that we can continue working on. But my guess is we've got a couple more weeks and we'll be back at it.
Anthony had another question. He said, is LinkedIn still, or is it being used more and more? How would you suggest utilizing it for your benefit? I'll give my 2 cents, but I'll let you chime in as the superintendent. Do you use LinkedIn? Do you have a LinkedIn?
I don't. This is probably, I just got Twitter. I don't have Facebook, so I'm a little more old school with a lot of this stuff. You probably have a better pulse on that one.
It's amazing to me that you talk to a lot of people in the industry, and I think that more people are getting involved in social media and stuff, but there's still a lot of people in our group that are just like, I don't want to deal with that, any of that crap. My feeling is this, Anthony, when you need LinkedIn, like when there's, like you get let go or you need a job and you need that network, that is not the time to start LinkedIn. So I don't like LinkedIn as I don't use it very much. I did, because I'm in quarantine here, I did go through and update all my stuff in it. So it's updated, but you do that once a year. But I routinely connect with people in there, and I can say it's helped me put my students in touch with other people. There's somebody I may not know that well, but I'm connected with them on LinkedIn. And being their professor, I don't mind reaching out and contacting people and being like, hey, I have a student graduating, and they noticed that we were connected on LinkedIn, and I was wondering if I could connect you to and have them, talk to you about something. So to me, you can't wait till you need a network to start developing a network. And I think Scott already talked about that from a personal standpoint. LinkedIn is just another tool. Is it necessary? I don't know. I would never not, I always look for somebody's LinkedIn when they're sending me a resume or interviewing. I always look, are they trying to put themselves out there as a professional? I don't care about their Facebook profile picture of them doing a keg stand. I look at Facebook as being a personal thing, but LinkedIn is meant to be a professional site. How professional are they? How detailed are they about themselves? So I think it's good, but I still don't utilize it as much as I probably could. Somebody said they've had success on Twitter getting jobs. They got an internship with Discovery Land from sending the super a DM and just asking. I mean, Scott, you've said it. What's the job market out there right now?
Yeah, you can go wherever you want. I mean, graduating from Turf College right now, you've kind of got the bull by the horns.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can literally send somebody a DM interview and be hired in 2 seconds. It's so tough. There's not a lot of students coming out of the programs and stuff. We saw an uptick last year with our numbers, which was good in all of our programs, but who knows what COVID-19 is going to do to that. Are people going to want to go back to school in the fall? Penn State may just totally shut down. I mean, talk about devastating to a university. I mean, that would be nuts. So they might do some version of it, but the industry is awesome right now and needs good people that are really into it. So, yeah.
God, I had a question for you. I know you kind of touched on projects and kind of, I guess, as far as restoration goes that you did at Marion. And just from my background, when I was there for, I guess, the Hans restoration in 18, I was there on site. And I guess one thing I was kind of wanted to hear from your perspective is when you're going through your resume and, you're putting all this stuff down, whether it's historical, restoration projects, and I guess where do tournaments, I guess, lie as far as networking? And I met a lot of people, you know, whether it was through LeBar or Liable Irrigation, doing, the Marion Restoration Project, and then coming back to Oak Hill to do the Andrew Green Restoration Project. And that year, thankfully, I was able to be a part of the Senior PGA Championship as well. And I guess is where where do you weigh, I guess, major tournaments and compared to, massive scale renovation restoration projects on your resume?
As far as where to put them on your resume, or which one do you think is more important to go get?
I guess I'm looking more important, like whether you decide, I guess I'm kind of in the seat where it's like, am I looking to do another tournament in my next internship, or maybe go somewhere that's doing another project? I guess I just wanted to hear your 2 cents about kind of climbing the ladder and experience wise.
I mean, you have such a good, diverse background already right now. I don't think you could make a wrong step for another internship.
Mm-hmm.
I would try to go see something a little bit different than what you've seen, and just diversify yourself in an area that you want to possibly be in, and build that brand with different people than you've already built it with. That's kind of the best. With all the stuff that you've already seen, I mean, give it a few years and you'll go to the national show and you'll sit there and you'll know a lot of the people that you're around, which is the cool part about creating a network and then building a network and making it successful for you.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, do you have any positions or things open now that you're looking to fill?
We are trying to sort out housing right now. We've got got 3 more guys coming in May, and then in the fall we'll sort of regroup and see where COVID's at versus where our construction phases are at and where the maintenance facility's at, as far as building housing back there. So there's a lot of moving parts right now. I don't have anything open at the time, but this fall I should have a better pulse on what we're looking for.
Awesome. I don't see any other questions in here, but that was good. We had a lot of questions, and I want to thank everybody for coming, and Scott, you too, and Kyle, I'll let you kind of wrap it up and wind us out of here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you touched on that really piqued my interest, is just moving forward in my my education and getting out in the field within the next couple of years. With that being said, I hope everything's going well down in New Jersey for you. With everybody else, I hope everybody's staying healthy. And thank you again, Scott, for taking time out of your day to speak with us. Yeah, lots of great information, and definitely use this moving forward. And I hope everybody else will as well.
Glad it was helpful. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we'll see you back up on campus sometime in the fall when we're back here, or maybe the spring, whenever that happens. But thanks again, really appreciate it. And, for everybody listening, or not listening, we'll be on YouTube. But I want to thank the people that did show up in here and ask the questions and stuff. So with that, peace out.
Thanks.